Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. In today's episode of Friday Ramblings, really want to talk about two things, whatever else comes, to be as we're walking around. But I want to talk about watering. It's one of the most misunderstood practices for gardening. I get questions all the time. When do I water? How often do I water? I can't answer that because there's so many different factors that come into play. And we're going to talk about planting your cool weather crops, your fall crops, mid-season. It's almost the end of July right now. And most gardens, we can get in a fall crop. A lot of times people say, well, what zone are you in? And we only really use that in North America. We don't use metric and we use zones. I don't know why we use zones. They don't really tell you a whole lot. Zone 7 here may be different than zone 7 over there because you're really just trying to figure out what are your cool seasons, what are your warm seasons. So anytime you hear a gardener talking about warm season, you have to know what yours is. And anytime you hear a gardener talking about the cool season, you have to know when yours is. And you basically figure out when do the frosts end, when's your last frost date, close to that, and when does the soil start warming up, and then how long a period of time, what's the period of time between last frost date and first frost date. Here in Maryland, zone 7, we have really, let's just say May 1st all the way now into later October. The frost date keeps getting pushed back, and that's why one of the reasons the zones aren't that effective is because temperatures are changing. It stays warmer here longer and longer now over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Here is my cherry tomato hedge, doing really well. A little tight walking through here, but you can see all the different cherry tomatoes. So zones aren't that important. It's not like you say, well, I'm in zone 7, I got to start on date, May 15th. You got to figure out, when the cool weather is, when the warm weather is, and you plan around it. So we'll talk about that briefly. We'll talk about that at the end. I want to talk about watering first. This is the corn. It is now 8 feet tall. The silks are just showing up. The tassels come first, and there's a bunch of silks in there. My only concern is that the tassels, I guess it's normal, come first. I don't have a lot of corn silks around, so I'm not sure how many ears I'm going to get. However, it's doing really, really well. If you've been following that first video, it's well over 8 feet tall. Now, watering is confusing to a lot of people. I get asked from seed starting, when do I water, to when they're in little containers, how often do I water, to plants out here in the garden, well, it's hot, how often should I water? And the answer is when they need it. Now, we're not going to talk about seed starting containers, but in your main garden, a couple of truths. 1 inch of water per week will allow your plants to survive. However, we grow our vegetable plants to thrive, and that's the big difference. So whenever you hear 1 inch of water per week, they're not really wrong. That keeps a plant alive, but you want them to be thriving. You want maximum production, and you're really going to be watering differently based on how hot your temperatures get. It's been 95, 100 for the last 2 weeks. Everything in here is getting watered every other day. My containers probably getting watered every day. I'm waiting for a break. I have another week of 95-degree weather. Watering is what's helped keeping all these plants looking so green and alive. And here's why. Tomatoes look pretty good. It's the early morning, so it's got all this mist on here. And I'm looking for diseases as we're walking around and problems. So I see a lot of leaves with holes in it. That's usually from insects. A lot of die-off. When people start panicking, I have blight. I mean, maybe this looks a little bit like a fire blight, but I don't think so. I've never had that before. I don't know why I said that, but I was just reading about it. What happens is the heat stresses your plants. Leaves typically die from the bottom because they send resources up to the top of the plant where it's growing. So when you have die out from the bottom, that's kind of normal. You're really looking for specific patterns. I don't see them here, but I keep up my spray routine pretty regularly. So most of your warm season crop plants, especially tomatoes, not only grow roots straight down, into the depth of the soil, but they grow surface roots everywhere. And you're not just watering 1 inch of water right there to go down to depth. You're watering the whole surface area. That's why we mulch. You want to protect those surface roots from the sun when it's 95, 100 degrees, because that soil will bake and get well over 100 degrees. It damages the surface roots. It doesn't kill off the plant, but you want to keep this whole area moist. The surface roots need to be watered. The soil needs to be watered to depth. That keeps your plants thriving in this hot weather. If it's 95, you don't water for 3 or 4 days, or you water when the plant's wilting, the damage is starting to happen. You know, your plant's not going to die. It's going to survive, but you want them to thrive, especially for squash and zucchini. These are green, not only because, you know, I'm spraying regularly and feed them fairly regularly, it's because they're getting plenty of water. Now, the question I also get asked is how often, or how do I know how much 1 inch of water is? And that varies. That's a really good question, because I'm on well water, so my water comes out more slowly than maybe your water if you're on like city water, or you have water that's sort of pressurized. You get a 5-gallon bucket, maybe we'll come across one here. You mark inside the bucket 1 inch, 2 inches, and 3 inches, and then you fill it with your hose and you count. When you reach the 1 inch mark, if it takes 6 seconds, you know it's 6 seconds of water coming out of there gives you 1 inch of water. And a 5-gallon bucket is approximately 1 square foot, let's just say. And you can see one right over in there. That's from Lowe's. You know, the bottom's about 1 square foot. So 6 seconds, I know that I have 1 inch. And if I'm going to water, let's go over to the cucumbers. Now, yesterday we had a ton of rain, so I'm not going to be watering. That's the other thing, is that you want to have a rain gauge out so that if it rains hard or it's raining slowly over 2 hours, you know if 1 inch or 2 has fallen, because you do want that inch of water. You just don't want it once a week. You want it more regularly. So if we're coming over here, cucumbers will send out surface roots too. You go right to the stem, you know, water for that 6 seconds, you know you have 1 inch of water right in the main area. But then you also want to come out a foot from the stem, foot over this way, coming out here. So it's going to take you a good, you know, 24 to 48 seconds to really soak in this whole area to give this cucumber plant the water that it needs. And when it's in the 90s, 95, you're going to be doing this every other day. If you're not watering your cucumbers consistently, you're going to get cucumbers that sometimes are a little bit deformed. Watering issue, heat does that, but they tend to try and mature more quickly. They yellow a little bit more quickly. They just don't stay nice and green like that. So I'm going to be watering with these temperatures, maybe daily, depending on what's going on, but at least every other day. And you can see the plants look really, really healthy. Lots of bugs flying around. Forgot to put on the bug spray. My ankles are getting bit by mosquitoes right now. But the plants look really good. I hope that clears up a little bit for watering. So containers, even more, you have to water even more often because they really heat up. Now, the use of mulch helps keep the moisture on the surface roots. That's why we do that. So if you have a chance, mulch. This is an area, I just shot a video on it. I'll put a link in. These are, let's see if I remember, carrots, peas in the back, radishes in the middle, beets in the front. Cleared out this whole area with my harvesting videos, did really well. Getting the cool season crops in now, towards the end of July. Now there's no exact time for that. Like I can't say, oh, well, I'm in Maryland Zone 7 or I'm on the East Coast, start now. You have to look at, again, when your frost date appears. Mine's towards the end of October. Or when the heat really breaks and you're getting back into the 80s if you're in a place that doesn't get frost. Those are Cherokee tomatoes, and they're ripening kind of funny. So that one right there in the middle, yellow, that's being bleached by the sun because I probably took out too many leaves. And the sun on these hot days, 95 week after week, will bleach the tips of your tomatoes or whatever parts of your tomatoes are showing. So you have to know when the heat's going to break, if you don't have a frost date, or a combination of both, and you have to know when your frost date is. So again, mine's towards the end of October, so I have August, September, October, and I can grow into November. Because the cool weather crops can take a frost, they're going to be able to deal with that, and they'll continue to grow. When you get your harder frosts, or you get the prolonged freeze like I had here in May, where the temperatures drop below 32 and they stay there for several hours, that's when your cool weather crops can have a problem, because their roots freeze. If their roots stay fine, then the plant stays fine. The leaves are able to take that frost. Some plants, like peas, their leaves can take that frost, but the flowers and pea pods can't. So if peas take 75 days to be fully mature, you want to make sure you're starting them now, mid-season, and you have 75 days till the frost shows up in your area, or you're going to not get as many pea pods as you want. The cool thing about peas is you can actually eat the leaves. So I hope that gives you some info on watering and how frequently you do it. You know, you're not just looking at the leaves and saying, hey, the leaves look, you know, pretty good, I'm not going to water it. Because by the time the leaves are suffering, the plant's already killing off leaves on the bottom of the plant to conserve resources, send them up to the top of the plant, and your plant's going to look beat up. And now for the mid-season crops, or the mid-season plantings for your cool weather crops going into the fall. Let me see if I can get around this. Plant them in waves and keep notes. For instance, I planted that spot a couple days ago. I'll put the date down. I'll do another planting of the same vegetables probably in a week to 14 days. Make notes on that, and I will look to see how well they do coming into, you know, the heavy frosts and freeze into my zone. It's really the best way to do it, is to take notes, and don't just look to say, hey, he's on the East Coast, we have the same zone. That really does vary, even when we have the same numbers. Let's see what else we have in here. So I encourage you to get your mid-season garden planted now, because a lot of these plants are going to get beat up. Even though they look good now, they're going to die off. So, and I get tired too. I mean, come the end of July, the beginning of August, I'm like, do I really feel like maintaining this? And the answer is, yeah, I do. I just wish it wasn't so hot and humid. Get the fall plants in now, because you'll probably go through a phase where you kind of fade out, but then you kind of get reinvigorated when the cool season comes rolling in, your fall crops are going well. If you don't have the space, like this year I purposely left space in different areas to direct seed. I'm doing a lot of videos on direct seeding this year. Start growing your fall crops in containers. You know, your seed starting cells or pint containers, but you don't want to leave those black small cells out here in the sun. Like my seed starting station's right over there. We'll walk over to that. Those are actually plants that have been sitting in there for 90 days. I just never used them. They will survive, but they're going to stay miniature. You'll see that. But you don't want to put a flat of seed starts out here. When that temperature gets to 90, it's just going to bake them. So you want to have a shady area, like I have a second level right under here. You could seed start, slide them right in here. But anything, look, even an onion grew in there. And these peppers look pretty good, actually. But if you have this sitting in the sun and you're trying to start things, they're just going to get baked. You're going to have to water it 4 times a day. So just start a cell, slide it into the shade, keep an eye on it. When they germinate, if they need a little more light, take them out, put them up top, put them somewhere they have sun. They're going to be perfectly fine. I like growing now in these fabric pots by Root Pouch. They're pretty impressive. These are marigolds that are going to get transplanted. You can see, I can't even pull that apart, but the roots grow through here. I'm going to be offering these at my seed shop. Right now we have the 5-gallon, 10-gallon root pouches, but I'm going to have these smaller pouches because they're pretty impressive. They can be reused, and they're actually made out of good part of recycled water bottles, and they don't add new products into it that are like the oil-based products and stuff like that. They use a lot of natural fibers and the recycled plastics. So that is my rambling for today. Hope you enjoyed it and gives you some ideas what it means to water your garden. And when in doubt, water. You can't really overwater plants in the ground. You can't really overwater plants in containers. Certain plants like a drying out period in containers, but if your containers have the drainage holes, you can't really overwater them. And I really recommend getting some of your cool weather crops started. 95 is a little hot for lettuces and stuff like that, so I'll put them in later. But for instance, if radishes take 30 days to mature, lettuce takes 45 days to mature, you want to be putting those into the ground now because it's still going to be hot in August. But if your plants take 60, 65, 75 days, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, you plant them sooner. Beets, peas, you know, it kind of makes sense. But don't wait around for people telling you, you know, when to start everything. Experiment. I want to just encourage you all to really experiment, keep a journal, take notes, and you'll be able to figure out what works best in your garden for planting times, for watering, for fertilizers, all that kind of stuff. Thanks for watching, and please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com.